All right, Mike, everybody, we're going to talk now with Rodney. He's going to talk a little bit about F5 and how F5 is leveraging intelligence to really help increase the security posture of financial services as well as a lot of other industries.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, what can you tell us how F5 is leading in this space, Rodney?
Because of where F5 sits in the network, they're what they self-describe as the strategic point of control. And they've since 2004 they rewrote their application to become a full proxy, completely decoupling the client side and the server side of the connection. And if you look at what a company that used to start as a load balancing and a global server load balancing solution, they had sort of an all-in moment where they decided that they wanted to become a security company. So in 2004, they purchased a company called Magnifier, which was something they rebranded to Traffic Shield, that later got rewritten and put on top of their traffic management operating system as their web application firewall solution. And as the company has grown and evolved and the threat landscape has changed over the years, they've continued to improve on that to what is now their advanced web application firewall solution. And it's a dynamic web application firewall that understands how an application behaves and it protects it accordingly. Now, one of the things that we can start talking about is that threat landscape and how it's broadened when you start talking about API to API communications and microservices environments. There's a lot of things that we have to protect that we didn't consider, say, 10 years ago in the web application firewall space. And on top of that, when we start looking at the sophistication of these attackers and how human-like these bots have become over the years, it becomes harder and harder to detect them. So F5, as part of their acquisition strategy, they purchased a company called Shape back in 2020, which brings in an artificial intelligence and machine learning component to protect against things like credential stuffing attacks. And using credential stuffing as an example, here we're talking about an attack that isn't a known vulnerability. It's not something that can be picked up by a signature, and it's not something like a brute force password attack. These are good known credentials that are purchased on the dark web for the sole intent of using them against multiple web properties because people do password reuse attached to their, let's say, email address, right? So you need something around AI and machine learning to be able to recognize how people log in, when they log in, and that's sort of the direction that F5 sees the industry going, and they're sort of leading the way on that charge.
So you talked a little bit about how they kind of rebuilt or changed their approach really towards security in 2004, and some of the acquisitions along the way. I think you also mentioned to us at one point that they've really changed their strategy on the platform itself. So how they're bringing these solutions to market, and so with some of the new announcements around their products, how does that set them up for future capabilities?
So future forward looking, you're absolutely right. Their acquisition strategy is really built around multi-cloud environments, hybrid cloud environments. So the consumption model over the years for F5 has changed a great deal. What used to be this purpose-built appliance that comes with this proprietary code that you stick in a rack in a data center has now become this consumable software that you can attach onto your hypervisor in your local data center, that you can deploy inside of Amazon's cloud, that you can insert into Google's cloud. And if you look at their Volterra acquisition, which happened last year, now they're taking this, what they call F5 distributed cloud services, and they're able to stitch all of these different cloud environments together to give you this single pane of glass that you can just, for lack of a better term, drag and drop web application firewall policies on top of. They see the industry and security being managed holistically as policy, as opposed to having to configure all these each individual components depending on where they live. So that's really where F5 has been focusing their attention with regards to development and acquisition.
So, from a security standpoint, we hear a lot about how a lot of solutions are built around this idea of intent. So, you may not know specifically that this is a threat vector or something like that, but you can tell by the actions of a perpetrator that it's probably malicious. It kind of sounds like you're approaching security from the same standpoint, where you're kind of, the intent is to build in those protections everywhere. So instead of saying, oh yeah, I've got to configure my security as well, I can say, okay, I'm deploying somewhere else, I can bring the same kind of policies with me.
Yeah, it is. And if you look at the distributed nature of applications today and where they live and how they exist and API to API communication, there's not this definitive single ingress egress point where I can just put a policy on anymore. So it becomes more of a question of understanding workloads and what things look like with normal behavior. They just made another acquisition. Their most recent acquisition is a company called ThreatStack, which does just that. It resides where the applications live, understands the workloads, and it takes all of that information and it looks at it from an artificial intelligence standpoint to determine whether or not something nefarious is actually taking place. So gone are the days where, oh, this is cross-site scripting or request forgery or a SQL injection. Right? That's the low-hanging fruit that's always going to be banging up against applications until I'm long gone. But the the modern threat is more around leveraging the weaknesses in an application because of things like credential stuffing, as an example. We have to understand the workload, what it looks like with normal behavior, and then figure out a way to determine whether or not that person's doing something bad.
So, kind of historically, the financial industry, banking, et cetera, in some ways they're ahead of the space very much, but um, traditionally it's always been, this idea of a physical parameter, whether it's that bank branch, whether it's that, trading house, whether it's, that advisor's office. But obviously things have changed dramatically from a consumer standpoint. The expectation is for us to be able to do everything online or mobile. But now we have, those same people who used to be in that quote secure perimeter now doing those kind of transactions, on a home network or sitting in a coffee shop somewhere. And you've kind of hinted that things have changed dramatically. I don't think at this point we're going to necessarily go back. So it sounds like F5 is a good strategy moving forward to really keep adapting as the demands of the market change as well.
I think you're right. I think what I like about F5 is they saw this early on, and you hear the term zero trust network architectures today, right? And I think sometimes that people look at that, they have a misconception that that's a product or an offering. And really what it is a paradigm. It's not quite a framework, but it's the idea that it doesn't matter if this person is in Buffalo, inside of my office, connecting to my application, or if they're halfway across the world coming in from their mobile device. I'm going to treat them exactly the same, and that's where F5 has been, I think, leading the way security wise. And to your point, banks were way out in front of this as well, because we're talking about people's money, and there's two things that people want. They want to make sure their money is secure, and they want to make sure they can get to it whenever and wherever they want to. So those are pretty good drivers for zero trust, in our opinion.
All right. Thanks, Rodney. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.